So here's something that's as close to breaking news as we're going to get on this channel. This afternoon, at a press conference where she essentially declared that the Department of Homeland Security and I guess the entire federal government was going to be occupying the state of California with the aim of removing their elected representatives and extirpating left-wing ideology from the state.
The Department of Homeland Security and the officers and the agencies and the departments and the military people that are working on this operation will continue to sustain and increase our operations in this city. We are not going away. We are staying here to liberate this city from the socialist and the burdensome leadership that this governor and that this mayor have placed on this country and what they have tried to insert into this city.
In addition to that, Noem had Senator Alex Padilla of California tackled to the ground and detained.
I'm Senator Alex Padilla. I have questions for the Secretary, because the fact of the matter is a half a dozen violent criminals that you're rotating on your heads off.
How many of our ICE agents have been doxxed for doing their duty, how they have been targeted.
It's hard to overstate the seriousness of this. I can't recall a time when the federal government was arresting federal representatives, when department heads in the federal government were treating federal representatives as if they were little more than common criminals. My immediate thought observing this is that there are two analyses we can make here. The first relates to just the Trump administration's conception of itself vis-a-vis the rest of the country. Again, this is not the behavior of a White House official, of an administration official, of a government that views itself in the proper constitutional relationship with the states, with other branches of government. It does not view itself in a relationship of cooperation and collaboration with the states. It views itself in a hierarchical relationship where it is the dominant partner and the states, especially states led by Democrats, are fundamentally subordinate. Or to put this in less academic language, the president and his various viziers see themselves as the kings of America, the boss of America, and the rest of us must obey. And so when Senator Alex Padilla asks a question of Noem, Noem doesn't respond like a government official speaking to a representative of the public she's supposed to be serving. Noem responds like an aristocrat offended that a commoner would ask her anything. There is a clear political theory of the Trump administration under which they're operating, and you see it everywhere. You see it in their decision to deploy the National Guard, the military, to people who are lawfully protesting. You see it in this incident. You see it in the way that Trump has tried to command law firms and universities and state education bureaus and basically every other entity within the society from the White House as if he is somehow the boss, issuing executive orders like they're royal decrees. The political theory of the Trump administration is that last year's election was some kind of mystical transference of sovereignty, sovereignty meaning ultimate authority in the society. Now, in traditional American political thought, sovereignty belongs with the people. It's imbued in the Constitution and in their state constitutions. That's where ultimate authority lies. The president pledges an oath to the Constitution. The military pledges an oath to the Constitution. Because the Constitution is the embodiment of the sovereignty of the people. It was created by the people, ratified by the people. But that's not how Trump seems to see his position or see last year's election. Instead, they see that election, he sees that election, as essentially something that anointed him as the living embodiment of the will of the people. And thus, he is not merely a representative. He is the people in some fundamental, again, mystical way. And thus, whatever he says goes. He's the boss. If he tells a state to do something, and a state says, no, you don't have that authority, doesn't matter. He told them to do it, and so they must do it. If people protest actions by the administration, if they exercise their constitutional rights, and I'd say their natural rights, to protest the administration, to protest what they believe is an unjust action of government, for Trump, who takes that personally, that is essentially standing against the will of the people. And they say this, they use this language. They say that protest, political opposition, constitutes some effort to overturn the will of the people, to nullify the previous election, as if the election imbued them again with sovereign power. As if the United States isn't a system where there is multiple and overlapping spheres of representation, where yes, the president represents a segment of voters, but so does the Congress. They represent the voters. So do the states. They represent the voters. There are all these levels of representation, and part of the challenge of American government is aligning those various levels of representation to get anything done. But they all have their spheres of influence, their spheres of authority. They're within their rights, within limits, but they're within their rights to protest, to disagree, to file suit, to oppose. That's how the American system's supposed to work. But again, the political theory of the Trump administration is that no, winning the election made Trump something like the king, something like a monarch, unchecked authority, unquestioned authority. And if you disobey, if you resist, if you say no, then they have the authority to send the military after you, to send the National Guard after you, to arrest and detain you, even if you are a sitting United States Senator, one of the 100 most influential and powerful people in the country, who represents a state of 33 million people. Doesn't matter. To them, you're no more than a bug, a fly. It's fundamentally undemocratic, anti-democratic. It is opposed to the basic theory of government in this country and basic American values, and it's an assault on basic American liberties. If they're telling you that they do not respect your representatives, if they think your representatives are subordinate to them, then they're telling you that they think you are subordinate to them, that you do not matter to them, that you must obey, or else. So that's one way, that's one mode of analysis. Me being me, I'm also going to take a bit of an historical lens. And I should say, not even Lyndon Johnson when he sent the National Guard, or Kennedy when he sent the National Guard, or Eisenhower when he sent the National Guard to recalcitrant southern states. Not even they used the language of liberating those states from the elected representatives. What they said was that the law is the law, there is a court order, and we have to enforce it.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This afternoon, following a series of threats and defiant statements, the presence of Alabama National Guardsmen was required on the University of Alabama to carry out the final and unequivocal order of the United States District Court of the Northern District of Alabama. That order called for the admission of two clearly qualified young Alabama residents who happened to have been born Negro.
But there was no talk of liberating Alabama from George Wallace, or Arkansas from Orville Faubus. It's a genuinely extreme escalation of rhetoric. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure Kristi Noem is smart enough to really understand the implications of what she's saying. This is not the brightest bulb, not the sharpest tool in the shed. Anyway, historically, there aren't that many precedents for the federal government threatening to liberate a state, essentially stating that its leadership is illegitimate on account of it being elected by the wrong kinds of people. But there are instances of this sort of thing happening, not from the feds, but from movements representing the reactionary forces in the society, the revanchist opposition, in particular, to Reconstruction. The coups that toppled or undermined black-led governments in Louisiana and Mississippi and South Carolina and North Carolina throughout the 1870s were led by political figures who believed not that these governments were doing anything wrong, but that by virtue of having been elected by Black Americans, that they were inherently illegitimate, that they could not count because the people themselves did not count. And so they're going to remove the government and impose their own, impose what they meant legitimate on this racial basis. And there's never one-to-one analogies in history, but there's an echo of this in Secretary Noem's rhetoric, an echo of this notion that because of who elected the governments of California, of Los Angeles, State of California, therefore they're illegitimate. Because they are opposed to Trump, therefore they're illegitimate. Echoes of this notion of legitimacy being tied, not to a lawful democratic procedure, but to the identity of those who participated in it. A few months ago, I think in casual conversation with some friends, I referred to the Trump government as being the closest thing we have ever come to electing the Confederacy. And what I meant by that is not so much that they have the exact ideology of the Confederacy, although the distance is not that far apart. What I meant by that is that the Confederacy was founded on this fundamental notion that humans were not equal, in fact, that there was a natural hierarchy of human beings. That some belong in the top and some belong on the bottom. Some were to be high, some were to be low. And that's clearly the operating belief system of the administration, that large swaths of Americans must be subordinate on the basis of their identity. And that it's the role of the federal government to enforce these hierarchies, even if that means overturning legitimate results, legitimate elections. You know, I said earlier that there aren't that many examples of what the administration is threatening to do in American history, but obviously there's one big recent one, and that's January 6th. And I can already hear in my head when I said that earlier, some of you viewers saying, well, Jamal, what about January 6th? January 6th, where the president and his supporters tried to overturn an election result, not because it was unlawful, but because they viewed it as illegitimate. They viewed it as illegitimate because Trump lost, but they also viewed it as illegitimate because the people that elected his opponent were illegitimate in their view. And so what is Kristi Noem promising? She's essentially promising a January 6th led by the federal government, aimed at state governments that do not submit to or obey the administration, that are led by the wrong people, that are elected by the wrong people. They'll storm every capital they need to make sure that we obey. They don't want to govern us. They want to rule us. But we can still say no here. We can still say that this is democracy, a nation built on self-government. We can still say that we don't have kings in America.